Hi, this is Teddy. Today's episode is about Mississippi. Here are some facts about Mississippi. Mississippi is the 34th most populous state with around 3 million people. The capital and largest city is Jackson. The governor is Republican Phil Bryant. The senators are Republicans Roger Wicker and Cindy Hyde-Smith. Mississippi sends 4 representatives to the U.S. House of Representatives, 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Bye, y'all.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and for our Politics of Mississippi episode, I am here with Jake McGraw, who is the Policy Director at the William Winter Institute and also the editor of the Rethink Mississippi website. Hi Jake.
Hi there.
Thanks so much for joining me. I'm excited to talk about Mississippi.
Well, me too. I do it for a living, and I'm still excited about it.
Maybe you could just give us a little bit of background and what you do for your job and sort of where you're coming from with your understanding of Mississippi politics.
The William Winter Institute, which is named after former Governor William Winter, who served in the early 80s and was a progressive governor who made great strides on education and was also the first governor in Mississippi history to make a really thoroughgoing effort to address the racial injustices that have taken place in our state. And so the institute that came to bear his name, we've been in existence for 19 years now, but we try to carry forward that legacy. And so we work in pursuit of racial justice and equity in Mississippi, starting in Mississippi, but also reaching beyond. And we do it through work in communities across the state and across the South. We do work in classrooms, high school, college classrooms. And then my part of it is working in the policy arena, trying to work with local and state government officials to sort of light a better path in Mississippi and try to work toward a more just and equitable future, potentially for the younger generations and the generations to come.
Maybe the place to start with our conversation about Mississippi might be just sort of what does the politics look like? So on the face of it, on paper, Mississippi looks like a very Republican state, maybe one of the most red states on the map. So right now, the governor and lieutenant governor are Republican. Both U.S. senators are Republican. 3 of the 4 congressional districts are represented by Republicans, and both the state House and state Senate have majority Republicans. So do you think that Mississippi is actually as Republican as those stats might lead you to believe?
Well, the honest but always unsatisfying answer is yes and no.
Okay.
So certainly in terms of who holds power in the state right now, it is uniformly Republican on the state level. So as you mentioned, we have supermajorities in both houses of the legislature, 7 or 8 statewide offices, including governor and lieutenant governor. Lieutenant governor of Mississippi is actually a very, perhaps the constitutionally most powerful position in the state, and so that's a very significant office. And certainly on a national level, we have 2 Republican senators, as you mentioned, 3 or 4 members of the House. The answer, the no part of that answer, why we are not as Republican as we seem, is that Mississippi is a state whose politics are divided, perhaps more than any other, along racial lines. And we are the state that has the largest percentage of Black residents in the country, between 37 and 38%. The white population is about 60% of the state, but in recent elections, we've had about 90% of our white voters vote for Republicans, whereas among Black voters, voters of color, you have more than 90%, often upwards of 95% above, voting for Democrats. And so politics here, the red-blue politics is as much black-white as anything. And so that creates a bit of a paradox for Democrats here, especially as you compare us to other deep red states and other deep South states, the Democrats actually probably have a higher baseline here than other states. Start with a higher floor. But because there is such uniformity in the white vote in the state, it creates a pretty low ceiling. So most political observers in this state will kind of throw out, a Democrat will start with 40% of the vote in a statewide election, can work hard for 45, and maybe even max out at 48. But getting to 50 or above is very difficult. But then if you look at the composition of the legislature, because we have such a large black population, it means that we have a still pretty significant representation in the legislature. And until 2011, the Democrats controlled the state House of Representatives, and Republicans didn't get a supermajority until the 2015 elections. But what also sort of sets us apart in contrast with states like Alabama and Tennessee is that in the legislature and in local areas, you see a lot of white Democrats who are still able to win office. Many of them are doing so in districts that have large black voting populations, but I think roughly our composition of our Democratic caucus in the legislature is about 2/3 African American and about 1/3 white, which is a much more integrated caucus and integrated party than you see in Alabama, where I believe they only have at one point recently only had one white Democrat elected to the legislature. And so there's been some ongoing durability and strength, certainly on a local level for Democrats, but there is that hard ceiling on a statewide level that has been thus far very difficult to crack.
I'm curious what turnout might look like this year in Mississippi. So the state elections are on a different cycle. So the state house, state senate, governor are not up this year. I think they're up next year.
That's correct.
And there's no presidential election this year. I'm sort of wondering what you think the turnout might be like for the federal elections, given that that's one of the few things that's going to be on the ballot. So there's 2 Senate races, and then, of course, all 4 congressional districts are up. Do you have any sense of what that might look like?
I don't. And in talking to the people that have expertise in politics in the state, I can't find anybody that can speak with any certainty about it. It is it's the big overriding question that we face this fall, because we really don't have any prior examples on which to model this year. As you mentioned, we were voting on both of our U.S. Senate seats. Mississippi has had a tradition of reelecting its incumbent senators over and over again, and so we have one that's up just in the regular cycle. Senator Roger Wicker is running for his 3rd term, but we also have a special election to fill the seat of Thad Cochran, who was first elected to the Senate in 1978, and who is an institution in this state. I mean, we are recording this interview on a day that we're seeing still a lot of tributes to John McCain and bipartisan tributes inside the state of Mississippi. That's the sort of reverence that you get on both sides of the aisle for Senator Cochran. So having his name not on the ballot for the first time in more than 40 years is quite a shock, and it means that it's very hard to predict exactly who's going to turn out to vote and how they're going to vote. So how the race is shaping up. Governor Bryant appointed Cindy Hyde-Smith, who had been our Commissioner of Agriculture in the state, to fill out the last few months of Senator Cochran's term before they could have a special election in November. And so she is running as the incumbent, technically. And even though she has won 2 statewide elections before as Commissioner of Agriculture, they've always been pretty low wattage campaigns, and so her name ID is not very strong. She happens to be running against 2 people, one Republican and one Democrat, that are both much better known figures, for better or worse. So she does have the challenge from State Senator Chris McDaniel, a Tea Party Republican who actually ran against Senator Cochran in a primary in 2014 and came within an inch of beating him. It's really quite a political earthquake in the state. McDaniel, I mean, he is a guy who is brash, who is extremely divisive and strident, has waved the state flag, which has the Confederate flag in it, has waved that boldly and proudly, and so has really kind of not shied away from associations of white nationalism before it became in the sort of reached the national political consciousness. And he, in the first round of that Republican primary in 2014, he actually got more votes than Senator Cochran did. It was very close, but because there was a third candidate in that first round of the primary who got about 1%, it kept McDaniel from winning the 50% plus one that he needed to advance to the general election outright. So it triggered a runoff election, which, in perhaps the most fascinating moment in recent Mississippi political history, Senator Cochran was able to win that runoff against McDaniel because about 15,000 Democrats chose to vote in the Republican primary for him, and most of them African American. So it was done both because Cochran does have quite a bit of respect, but it was also a blocking move to try to keep Chris McDaniel out of the U.S. Senate. And so he never actually conceded that race. He has held a deep grudge about it, thinks that he was the rightful winner, thinks that, has made a lot of comments about illegal voting, again, back before that was in vogue nationally, and has been waiting for the moment to run again. And so he announced earlier this year, before Senator Cochran's retirement, to actually primary challenge Senator Wicker. But then after Cochran's retirement was announced, he switched to run in this special election. He is perhaps the best-known figure in the race, although he engenders a lot of opposition both from Democrats as well as the more establishment Republicans. And then the third candidate is the one that's carrying the Democratic banner, and that is Mike Espy, who's former congressman, the first black congressman elected from Mississippi since Reconstruction, was elected, I believe, in 1986, so won several additional terms, and then Bill Clinton appointed him Secretary of Agriculture in 1992-93. He served and left that post in 1994 under an ethics scandal that was brought by a special prosecutor, sort of in the same, coming out of the same mold as the Tin Star and the Whitewater investigation, when they were rooting through the Clinton White House and the administration. And so, there was charges of him taking gifts from folks that he would help regulate, and after several years of intense investigation and prosecution, he was fully exonerated and acquitted, but he had still lost his position in the cabinet as a result, and so he has not run for office since then, but has come back here in this year and was the first candidate to announce after Senator Cochran's retirement was announced earlier this year. Logistically, it's interesting, and this goes back to the question you asked about how do you predict who's going to actually turn out to vote, is that all three of these candidates are going to be on the ballot with no party identification on November 6th, on the general election day. And so when Mississippians go and vote in the regularly scheduled Senate election, which will have party ID and vote for members of Congress, and we have a few state judicial offices and some local offices as well that are up, they'll be voting in this special election among these three candidates. And then the top two vote getters, assuming none get a bare majority, will then go to a runoff 3 weeks after that election, which is the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. It's perhaps more importantly in the state, it's the Tuesday after the Egg Bowl, which is the Ole Miss Mississippi State college football game, and it's going to be the only race on the ballot. And so, it is unprecedented. It is very difficult to model, and just because they're, when Mississippi senators get elected, they keep getting elected for a long time, and so we just don't have an extensive track record upon which to judge this. So that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
But it also makes expertise pretty worthless.
I tend to, perhaps wrongly, sort of group Alabama and Mississippi in my mind frequently. Finally figured out which one is which, looking at a map. But, I'm wondering how similar or not similar they might be politically. On the face of it, they kind of look the same right now. But Alabama has this huge surge of progressive energy. They managed to elect a Democratic senator, albeit in a weird race. But, do you see that kind of progressive energy in Mississippi right now? Do you think that there are Democrats on the ground who are really fired up? Does any of that seem to be going on right now?
Well, again, the the kind of hedge answer is that there is and there isn't. And in fact,